For a decade, China called it the game changer that would redraw the global economy forever. The Northern Sea Route, a frozen corridor running along Russia's Arctic coastline, promised to cut the shipping distance between Shanghai and Rotterdam by nearly 40%. No Suez Canal, no Strait of Hormuz, no choke point that Washington could close with a carrier strike group. Beijing poured billions into Arctic infrastructure, signed energy partnerships with Moscow, and commissioned the most powerful non-nuclear icebreaker fleet in Chinese history. Analysts in London and Brussels watched nervously and said nothing. The Arctic, it seemed, belonged to China and Russia. But on May 3rd, something happened in the Barents Sea that Beijing never modeled in any of its strategic war games. The US didn't just show up in the Arctic, it locked it. In a joint statement released by US European Command and NATO's Allied Maritime Command, officials confirmed the largest coordinated Arctic naval deployment since the end of the Cold War. 3 Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines, the USS Minnesota, USS Indiana, and USS Delaware, surfaced simultaneously through Arctic ice in a deliberate, choreographed show of force that sent a single, unmistakable message to every capital watching. The US Navy can be anywhere under that ice, at any time, without warning. But the submarines were only the beginning. Within 72 hours of that surfacing, P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating out of Keflavik, Iceland, began flying continuous 18-hour surveillance loops directly over the Northern Sea Route's critical choke points, the Kara Strait, the Vilkitsky Strait, and the Laptov Sea Corridor. Every vessel, every transponder signal, every acoustic signature in those waters is now being cataloged in real time. China's Arctic trump card, the one that was supposed to make Western pressure irrelevant, has just been placed under permanent American surveillance. And that is only the first layer of what Washington has built up here. To understand why this changes everything, you have to understand what a Virginia-class submarine actually represents in this environment. The Virginia-class is 377 feet long, displaces nearly 8,000 tons submerged, and can sustain speeds exceeding 25 knots beneath the ice without a single surface contact knowing it is there. Its AN/BQQ-10 sonar suite, the most advanced passive acoustic system ever deployed on an attack submarine, can track and classify contacts at ranges that remain classified, but that former naval officers speaking to Defense News have described as operationally decisive. Each boat carries 40 weapons, a mix of MiG-48 ADICAP torpedoes and Tomahawk cruise missiles with a 1,000-mile range. This is not a patrol vessel. This is a precision killing machine that moves invisibly through the one environment China thought was its own. And the US didn't deploy one. It deployed 3 simultaneously. The simultaneous surfacing is not a coincidence. It is a capability demonstration, a deliberate signal that the US possesses the Arctic undersea coordination and ice navigation precision to operate multiple nuclear attack boats in the same operational area without a single collision, at depths and under ice conditions that would destroy most naval vessels on Earth. But the submarines are only one layer of this Arctic wall. The second is the P-8 Poseidon. The Poseidon is a Boeing 737 airframe rebuilt from the fuselage up as a submarine hunter. It carries the AN/APS-154 Advanced Airborne Sensor, a radar system with the specific capability to detect a submarine's periscope, wake, and mast at ranges far beyond visual range. More critically, it drops sonobuoy fields, floating acoustic sensors that sink to depth and transmit submarine signatures back to the aircraft in real time. A single P-8 deploying a full sonobuoy spread over the Vilkitsky Strait, the narrowest and most critical choke point of the entire Northern Sea Route, approximately 55 kilometers wide at its tightest, effectively turns that passage into an acoustic kill box. Nothing moves through Vilkitsky without being detected, classified, and tracked from the moment it enters to the moment it exits. The third element is the one that has received almost no coverage in Western media. and it is arguably the most strategically significant of all. Under a classified program now confirmed by Norwegian Defense Ministry sources, a new generation of fixed seabed sensor arrays, an Arctic successor to the Cold War-era SOSUS network, has been quietly installed along the Norwegian continental shelf and extended into the Barents Sea approaches. These are not buoys. They are permanent, cabled hydrophone arrays embedded into the seabed, feeding a continuous stream of acoustic data to NATO's Maritime Command in Northwood, England. Every vessel, every submarine, every surface ship transiting the western Arctic approaches is now acoustically fingerprinted and tracked from the moment it departs Russian Arctic ports. This surveillance net leaves no gap. The Northern Sea Route does not begin in the Pacific. It begins in Russian Arctic waters that now run directly through a surveillance net so dense that Beijing's own defense analysts, speaking to the South China Morning Post as recently as February, privately described it as a new Guyuk Gap. Except this time it stretches all the way to the Laptov Sea. So what happens next? There are 3 scenarios on the table, and the differences between them could reshape global trade for the next 50 years. In the first scenario, the most likely given current diplomatic postures, China accepts the new surveillance reality, but attempts to continue commercial Northern Sea Route operations under the cover of legitimate cargo traffic. The problem with this approach is a simple one. Every Chinese-flagged or Chinese-chartered vessel transiting the route now does so under continuous NATO surveillance, with Virginia-class submarines that can close to weapons range in under an hour, operating somewhere beneath the ice. In a crisis, the Arctic route does not become unreliable. It becomes a kill zone. In the second scenario, China accelerates its own Arctic icebreaker and submarine program to challenge NATO's acoustic dominance directly. Beijing is already accelerating its Type Zhou-96 ballistic missile submarine, a next-generation SSBN under construction at the Huludao shipyard in Liaoning, assessed by Western analysts to reach operational status before 2030. It is also expanding its Type 093B attack boat fleet with enhanced stealth and vertical launch capability. But here is the critical asymmetry. The US has been operating under Arctic ice since the 1950s. Its submarine crews are trained for it. Its sonar systems are calibrated for the specific acoustic properties of Arctic water, the temperature layers, the under-ice noise fields, the salinity gradients that make passive sonar both more powerful and more deceptive in polar regions. China's nuclear submarine program, for all its investment, does not have that institutional knowledge. It cannot be bought. It can only be built over decades. The third scenario is the one that keeps energy ministers in Tokyo, Seoul, and Berlin awake at night. If Washington escalates further, even symbolically, and begins intercepting or inspecting vessels on the Northern Sea Route under a legal framework similar to the Proliferation Security Initiative, the entire calculus of Arctic commercial shipping collapses overnight. This is not just a military story. The Northern Sea Route carries more than strategic value for Beijing. It is the physical backbone of China's Arctic energy strategy. A significant and growing share of China's LNG imports were projected to flow through Arctic routes in the years ahead, primarily from Russia's Yamal and Arctic 2 LNG projects on the Siberian coast. Those shipments depend entirely on a corridor that is now under permanent NATO surveillance. The global shipping insurance market has already begun to price in this reality. Arctic voyage risk premiums, which were already elevated following Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, have climbed further since the Barents deployment was announced, a signal that tells you far more about perceived risk than any government press release ever could. The ripple effects run further still. South Korea and Japan, both of which had begun tentatively exploring Arctic routing for their own LNG carriers, have paused those programs and redirected planning discussions toward the Suez Canal corridor. Booking inquiries on traditional east-west routes have risen measurably in the weeks following the deployment announcement. The global shipping industry is already recalibrating around China's Arctic ambitions. and it has done so before Beijing has fired a single shot in response. The arithmetic here is unforgiving. Rerouting via the Cape of Good Hope adds approximately 10 days of sailing time and nearly doubles fuel costs per voyage. The Suez Canal route is cheaper, but it runs through a corridor that Washington has already demonstrated it can influence, as Iran's experience in the Strait of Hormuz has made crystal clear. Every alternative route China reaches for runs through a choke point that someone else controls. That is precisely the trap Beijing spent a decade and billions of dollars trying to escape. And it is the trap that just closed again, this time in the Arctic. It would be a mistake, however, to read this as a clean American victory. Russia controls the legal framework of the Northern Sea Route under its domestic legislation, a position it has defended against US and EU challenges at the International Maritime Organization for years. Moscow operates more than 40 icebreakers, including the world's only fleet of nuclear-powered civilian icebreakers, 8 vessels strong, and 3 more under construction. And regardless of NATO's acoustic surveillance capabilities, a Russian-escorted Chinese convoy, transiting the route in peacetime, presents a legal and diplomatic problem for Washington that no Virginia-class submarine can resolve from beneath the ice. The deeper risk is this: if the Northern Sea Route becomes militarily untenable for Chinese commercial shipping, Beijing does not simply absorb the loss. It redirects that economic pressure southward, into the Strait of Malacca, into the South China Sea, into every other choke point where the rules of engagement are far less clearly defined than they are in NATO's Arctic backyard. Closing one door in the Arctic may open several far more dangerous ones in the Pacific. So what do you think? Has NATO's Arctic deployment permanently closed China's Northern Sea Route ambitions, forcing Beijing to abandon a decade of polar strategy and accept permanently Western surveillance of its most critical alternative to Suez? Or will China's accelerating submarine program, its deepening energy partnership with Moscow, and the sheer legal complexity of Arctic maritime law eventually force Washington to blink and pull back from a confrontation it cannot sustain indefinitely? We look forward to your comments. Thank you.